Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome, everyone, into the very heart of L'École, here in Paris. Wherever you are, we're so excited to have you with us to find out about this exhibition created by Rosella Fossard, the curator, the head curator, and my dear friend and colleague, Paul Paradis.
Hello, everyone.
Who is a scientific counselor of this exhibition and has been working on it for years. He knows everything by heart. He's going to share so many insights about this superb, a new art view of this Art Nouveau marvel that happened after the 1880s and until World War I. Well, let's jump right in, Paul, and find out from you, what was this marvelous new art and how does it relate to this exhibition you've set up?
Yes, thank you so much. First, I just wanted to say that I'm so honored to have been involved with this exhibition with Rosella Fossard, who's actually our curator. She's actually the head of research at l'École pratique des hautes études in Paris, and she's also a specialist in contemporary decorative arts. What is the hypothesis of this exhibition? The exhibition, if you notice in the title, we called it a new art, not necessarily Art Nouveau.
Right.
That was a very distinct choice. We want to talk about the hypothesis that jewelry, unlike what some people thought at the time, is not a secondary art. Jewelry is really at the heart of a new aesthetic, which was born in the latter 19th century. It was influenced by science, new discoveries. People were seeing these images that you see around me, crystals. They were interested in deep sea life because of the Challenger expedition in the 1870s. They were looking at microorganisms, Darwinism, vital force, life force. All of these things were becoming extremely popularized. It's actually popular science. We have a magazine in the US called Popular Science.
It's the birth of popular science during that time.
And we also had new materials, a new way of looking at nature, and also symbolism. The dream world of Gustave Moreau, of the sort of decadent literature of Huysmans. We'll try to touch on all these things as we move along, but what's also interesting is, as we can see actually in our first slide, we can see that we had a lot of change. Oh, sorry, that wasn't the right one. We had changes in the actual organization and structure of jewelry professions. The French Revolution had sort of dissolved all of these sort of trade organizations. So in the 1860s, you have a new trade organization just for jewelers. They create a school. Young people are encouraged to study drawing just for the decorative arts and especially for jewelry. You have a new look through the universal exhibitions. Great jewelers like Falise, like Weber, they participate in the universal exhibitions and they write critiques of jewelry. They elevate jewelry to a new level. So new profession, new materials, a new way of looking at jewelry, and what very important, I think it was around the 1891, they determined that jewelry and decorative arts could be part of the official salons. So the decorative arts, as you always say, they really take on their lettre de noblesse.
Can we see the cover piece? I don't think we saw that yet, the piece that's the poster. Two back?
Oh, sure.
Because that's going to be one of the pieces we'll look at tonight, right? And I know you worked so hard on that piece.
I don't know where you mean.
I might, that piece, the cover piece. We didn't have a chance to look at it yet, Paul. You picked that, and we might have a chance to see that in live later, right?
Yes, it's actually by Georges Fouquet, one of the great jewelers of Art Nouveau, and he was a specialist in this beautiful mosaic of opals, etc. And this allows us also to see the title, A New Art.
And the naturalism, the science, because this is kind of fantastic undersea creature, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
And then the next one, this one that you chose so lovingly for the exhibition, the Dragonfly Lady, right?
Yes. So we wanted to talk about actually metamorphosis. This is the main theme of the exhibition. Metamorphosis has several senses. It's the sense of the metamorphosis of a being into another type of being. It was a scientific curiosity.
There it is, live in the exhibition. She looks like she's alive. It's so fabulous.
Why can't life forces, why can't a human body transform? Why can't different animal and human kingdoms join? This was one of the sort of obsessions of the time, metamorphosis. But it has a double sense. It's also the metamorphosis of materials. And how materials work. And I told you already about this new idea, the trade of jewelry, a new respect for jewelry. And here, what are some of the references of the time?
Paul so well talked about naturalism, science, the idea that all these Jules Michelet and his books, his bestseller books about bugs and flowers in the sea were very important, but also was extremely important the influence from the Far East, the techniques and the ways of looking at nature from the Far East, as we can see very well with the Feliz, the gorgeous Feliz medallion pendant from the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, where we have this view of the wasp or the bee feasting on the flowers, observation of nature freed from a sort of schematic of designs. And then on the left, Alphonse Fouquet, the great house of all those movements, really. Alphonse Fouquet, the historicism, then Georges Fouquet, the Art Nouveau, and finally Jean Fouquet of Art Deco. Alphonse Fouquet and Paul-Victor Grandhomme are renewing and reviving very old techniques of enamel from the Middle Ages and even the Renaissance. So you have Renaissance images, Renaissance pictures here on what's called a chatelaine. There's a very fun video about chatelaine on our YouTube website. But a chatelaine is anything but pertinent to modern life. It's looking back, it's rethinking about history in a very romantic way.
We talk about techniques. They weren't necessarily new, but there was a rebirth. Enameling techniques, the secret of pliquage or enamel that had been lost since the Renaissance, rediscovered by a group of artists. Riffaut, one of the ones that was one of the people who revived this art, and René Lalique, new materials. You have horn, you have ivory, you even have imitation ivory, galalith. You have colored stones, not only precious stones, colored stones, chrysoprase, topaz. It's actually all of these materials which become sort of a palette for the arts. And you also have the chasing, which is very, very precise. You can see on that piece on the right. It brings vibrancy and life. And also settings of jewels become lighter and lighter. And we'll see that as when we take you, actually, it's no surprise, we're going to take you to the exhibition. And also great personalities. One of the themes of Art Nouveau is the arts that were commingling. So you had great personalities like the great René Lalique. We can't say enough about how much we appreciate him. He was a great designer, sculptor, jeweler, and then becomes a glass maker. But he was such a strong personality and such a creative force. And he worked with symbolist painters, this porosity of the arts. And we also have another great personality, thanks to whom Art Nouveau really exploded, is Mucha, this Moravian painter who becomes extremely a star by doing posters for Sarah Bernhardt. But he was a brilliant decorator, designer. He also designed books to help young people learn to draw. We'll talk about that later.
It's very interesting, too, that photo by Jean Imbert, that portrait of him and the previous portrait of Lalique, their personas, their charisma, they're really modern stars and celebrities.
Exactly.
He's all dressed up in this kind of peasant costume to stress his ethnicity, that he comes from Czechoslovakia. That leads us to getting ready for the upcoming lecture on photography and jewels, which will be in a couple of weeks.
Very good idea.
Yes. So it's all that transversality of the arts, photography, even commercial art, that all becomes an art form exactly the same as painting, sculpture, and architecture, as you said.
Yes, it's
right?
like it's as you always say, it's a renaissance, an RE-naissance. It's the renaissance of jewelry arts, of decorative arts. So how are we going to structure our visit today, Anita? What are the themes?
We're going to structure it exactly as you've structured your exhibition, Paul, which is the phantasmagoric nature, the fairies, the sylphs, the creatures in the forest, the creatures under the sea, mermaids, all of these imaginary beings are going to be our first chapter, and then the blossomings, all kinds of blossomings. Those blossomings can be women claiming their right to vote, for example, people having awareness of science and life, and moving toward what we know for modern art, which is definitely all there in the middle of this movement, is abstraction. Conceptual. The conceptual, which is often born out of the natural, out of, for example, right next to us we have this big poster of plankton, how a plankton looks. I can't help but think about it. So here we go, Paul.
So let's talk about phantasmagoric nature. What is our first theme here?
Our first theme is it's a gargoyle inspired. Viollet-le-Duc is in the midst of saving Carcassonne and Notre Dame. If it weren't for Napoleon III at Viollet-le-Duc, can you imagine? Notre Dame might have been taken down. It was in horrible shape. And they said, let's just get rid of it and use the stone. So here we have this kind of gargoyle creature being imagined out of the human id. Also, we have psychology being born, and that gives us an idea of how medieval transitions into modern. And our next slide, where we look at really the use of something that those of you who are with us since COVID times, you know I'm obsessed by the Middle Ages, and being obsessed by the Middle Ages, you have to love grisaille enamel. Grisaille, those shades of gray, was created in Limoges, was created to imitate sculpture for religious reasons. And here we have these two conjoined dragons embracing this gorgeous pink, violet, sapphire created by the genius Felice, incorporating very ancient medieval and Renaissance enamel techniques and even language of images, but to make these new jewels, totally new jewels. On the right, that is an enormous, maybe we'll have a look at it when we're out in the exhibition. It's an enormous mock-up for a big devant corsage ornament, which would be worn on the chest. And it's interesting that this mock-up, made by Alphonse Fouquet, that grandfather of the modern jewelry movement, was given by his grandson and his grandson's wife, Jean Fouquet, to the Museum of Decorative Arts in 1958. It's a big sort of chimera from 1889.
Exactly,
right?
this bestiary from the Renaissance and from the Middle Ages, which actually is going to lead us to the flower women, the other kinds of metamorphosis, like chimeras.
These animals, these part woman, part animal, winged creatures that have fascinated us since ancient Greece when they played such roles in ancient Greek legend. In this case, what happens with these new artists like Alexandre Seyon, they call this the despair of the creature, because this creature is in despair looking at modern decadence. Well, that also gives them an example to really a chance to dive into symbolism. Symbolism, the world of dreams, the world of legend, the world of myths. The use of those myths is why we even have the word psychology, isn't it? Because that comes from psyche. And on the right, it's sort of René Lalique taking the Sphinx back to what she was in ancient times, which is she was very victorious over mortal things, mortal beings. And in this case, the Sphinx is quite joyfully, basically, killing a serpent, a snake. And it's kind of, as she's hunting and killing the snake, you have what looks like the rising sun, the dawn behind her. Why do you see the dawn behind her? Because of exquisite, skillful guilloche work. The guilloche is the carving into the gold, and then the enamel, the hot enamel that's put over it to look very iridescent. We have a class in hot enamel, grand feu enamel at the school that we've taken, and boy, does it teach you a lot to try it hands-on.
Let's talk about dragons and dreams and nightmares. As we told you earlier, the symbolist movement was a huge influence on the Art Nouveau movement. And on the left, you have Victor Prouvé. He shows this Medusa. She's in the writhing coral. As you know, when she's beheaded by Perseus, her blood becomes coral. And Prouvé shows us this frightful horror that you might have if you're thinking of bad things. It's, again, the world of dreams, of literature, of Gustave Moreau. And on the right, Jean Dante, a very skilled metal maker and sculptor, he shows a rendition of Night. She's a very pensive woman. She's not having a nightmare. She's sort of looking to the sky. She has little stars in the veil, and the colors of the enamel again, and those emeralds. So whether it be nightmares or peaceful sleep, sleep and dreams and symbolism are very important. We can also talk about another theme, underwater. I told you about the Challenger, this great British ship that for, I think, 10 years, from 1872 to 1880, they went to 120,000 kilometers collecting sea creatures. And it's sort of ignited the imagination of the general public when they see this beautiful Lackerbauer, which you can also see behind me. This coral, the natural world, the order of it and the beauty of it, and also a little bit fearful, but we'll see later. And we have this beautiful little maison de verre. It's a real gem, if I may use a cliche. It's in an agate, tree agate really, and the beautiful rendition in Champ-Levé enamel around it with the starfish and the algae. But don't forget, the sea is also scary. It's deep. We can't see everything. This is the era of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Victor Hugo wrote The Workers of the Sea. Our friend Michelet wrote The Sea. So everybody was obsessed with undersea, but here you can see it's very troubling. You have Captain Nemo looking out of the window, the porthole of his submarine with that scary octopus or squid, depending on how you translate from the French. And look at the jeweler on the right, Louis Aucoq. He was one of the great jewelers of the second half of the 19th century and one of the teachers of Lalique. He takes that same scene, but this time through the porthole, you see this octopus, but there's a beautiful nymph lying at the bottom of the sea. Is she afraid, or is she inviting the octopus to come? You have a mousse of diamonds and the pearl. So, and translucent, transparent plique azur enamel. So again, the link between the arts is very clear in this slide, isn't it? What about blossomings? What about vital force?
Well, when we think of blossomings, we could also, again, we have to think about Jules Michelet. And after reading what you've done with this exhibition, I understand more why so many schools are called Jules Michelet. All over France, they're called Jules Michelet. And now I know, I want to read some of his books. I started last night. Odilon Redon. I have always been obsessed with Odilon Redon. I had one of his posters on my bedroom when I was growing up, dreaming of actually seeing his works in person, which I now can do anytime I want. Odilon Redon, here we have for blossomings of the way we're looking at nature as this potential for dreams, this potential for fantasy, but also truly accurate natural observation. Odilon Redon is one of the great symbolists. We have a poppy flower floating in the sky, almost like a moon. Well, we know what poppy can do, so is he referring to that? Maybe yes, maybe no. We have a lotus, an exquisite lotus on the lower left. The lotus, again, if you eat the lotus in the Odyssey, they talk about the lotus eaters. It has sort of hallucinogenic effects. Is that the idea? Maybe yes, maybe no. And a very characteristic Redon butterfly. The butterfly, as we've already seen, is this metamorphosis reference for everybody changing into modern people, modern lives, modern dreams. That butterfly, is there a flower in it? Is there a fairy in it? What matters is our imagination. And it really is a journey in the imagination, even when it's incredibly scientific. Those little bugs.
June bugs.
Yeah, they're little May bugs or June bugs. They have a lot of funny names. Doodle bugs. These bugs make a lot of noise. They're very harmless, but they can absolutely destroy farmers' fields. And here they are being observed in their funny little movements, the way they move, totally naturalistic, 100% scientifically correct, and yet very inspiring to the imagination. And as we see on the right, exactly how someone like Gaston Chopard takes the gorgeous bug, it's not so gorgeous when it's on top of you, the cicada, which can sort of fall on you, but the cicada is so symbolic. In Asian art, the cicada in jade was put on the tongues of the deceased so that they could sleep and live again and speak again. The cicada sleeps and wakes and speaks. So here you have these gorgeous cicadas who are playing around on a pussy willow branch with real pearls for a comb for your hair. Exactly how true naturalistic observation, true science, freed up by the Asian point of view to see these animals, these bugs outside of their schematic science drawing format, can be freed up by, for example, the 1857 bestseller by Jules Michelet on bugs. And which leads us exactly to how nature in its living way is observed, right, Paul?
One of the scientific discussions of the time was, what is the life force? What gives, what controls growth? What controls nature? They actually talk a lot about sap, the sap coming up. And what's interesting is you see two versions of living nature. On the left is a very sort of glamorous with diamonds on gold and silver by Boucheron, but it has a little, it's a chrysanthemum, which is an unusual choice for Western art, and the middle diamond is actually en tremblant. So they want to show this vital force in jewelry, whether it be with diamonds or on the right, Lalique gives us a very poetic Japanesant way of looking at a flower which is actually in the last phase of life. The petals are folding in, opaque enamel with no back. It's a little bit like plique azur, but it's opaque. And you have tourmalines just to represent maybe some little raindrops in the middle. So whether we're talking about the glamour of diamonds or this very poetic vision of René Lalique, jewelry in that period was so rich. This is one of the really coincidences and beautiful coincidences of this exhibition, is that Rossella Froissart found the link between this Alphonse Osbert, this very, it's a symbolist vision of lyricism, very poetic. You can tell it's at the start of the evening. And on the right, Boucheron created this piece. Hirtz was one of their great enamelers. it has a very similar diaphanous landscape. So you can see how close that the symbolist movement of pastels, paintings, and imagery actually enters into the jewelry workshops. This is a very rich and unusual period. Metamorphosis, this is the key to the whole exhibition.
When we talk about metamorphosis and we talk about this time period, this wonderful time period before the World War I fairies, the idea of women awaking in a dream. Here we have Gustave Moreau, really the father and scion of symbolism, the movement symbolism, with this dragonfly lady waking up from a sleep. It looks like she's in a hammock in her garden. Maybe it's a person who just had a dream about being in her garden. And on the right, we'll see it out when we're in the exhibition, this paper cutter of this flower woman. She's literally like a flower emerging out of the plant, waking up and existing out of the plant. It's a big paper cutter like that. We'll look at it when we're out there.
And what about the peacock?
Well,
the very essence of beauty, according to Darwin.
The peacock, and that's a jewelry shop that you have to visit inside the Carnavalet Museum, given by Jean Fouquet, made by Georges Fouquet with Alphonse Mucha. And Jean Fouquet, when he turned his store completely into an Art Deco store, he felt that he had to give that completely to the museum. In the middle, over here on the right side, and we have the actual drawing for you, is an incredible drawing by Lalique of a peacock tiara, a peacock diadem. Do you notice in our jewelry history course, we get into great detail with our teachers, our designer teachers, about how, because Lalique was his own artist and his own realizer and his own jeweler, his own boss, he did his whole sketch, all his thought process on the design itself, and then made the jewel. What's interesting is the reason I was able to show you that original design is thanks to the fact that there's a fond. It's an establishment of a group of 10,000 and plus drawings, designs for jewelry that are original, fabulous works of art on their own. It's called the Fonds Van Cleef & Arpels sur la culture joaillière de Paris. This is a group of designs that have been accumulated by the Maison for jewelry education. We have already used them for our jewelry design exhibition that was here. We used them preciously to create the 4-hour jewelry design course, which many of you have attended, and more I hope will, and more marvels will be coming out of that jewelry design fund. So we gave you a peek at an actual design today to have a sense.
Original drawing.
Yeah.
Shall we go to our third and last section?
Yes.
Abstractions. Of course, all of this nature, all of this proliferation, as time goes on, students start to study natural geometry. And you find geometry in nature. Look at this nautilus shell that Ruskin has so faithfully represented. And Henri Renan, who puts sort of crystals in the cave of our beautiful Pandora. There's this idea of if you look at natural structures, whether they're microorganisms or bigger, there's a certain natural geometry which starts to affect drawing schools. Students start to learn. Here you have, actually on the left is actually an architect. He's so interested in life force and showing the buds of these beautiful cucurbita maxima. He creates an entire book of just nature, its movement. What is the vital force in nature? And Grasset, the great designer of the time, we're going to talk a lot about him during the visit. He creates these poppies. And as you can see, this is all inspired by the natural world. It's not just triangles. Yes, it's triangles and squares superimposed. But they find this inspiration in actual creation, organic and inorganic. What about this living line?
So again, we have a design there that's of Buddleia. It's interesting that the arabesques of that Buddleia flower. A Buddleia is a wild flower that's considered actually a problem. Very often Art Nouveau likes to take flowers that are really weeds and turn them into flowers. So here Lalique makes a fabulous diadem, and that's a drawing we only can see thanks to the Fonds Van Cleef & Arpels sur la culture joaillière. And it shows you these arabesques expressed in a completely naturalistic way, based on how those flowers grow. In the middle, we have exercises made by students of Alphonse Mucha, of Georges Auriol and Maurice Pillard Verneuil, where the students had to use mirrors and repeat and repeat and repeat arabesques into infinity. And on the left, the pearl brooch, using pearl and blister pearl, uses the idea of maybe it's a pumpkin, maybe it's some kind of squash, but it evolves into completely the arabesque, the quintessential arabesque of Art Nouveau.
Stylization. Stylization is one of, and I talked earlier about structures, microorganisms, sea organisms. Henkel, who wrote, he did many prints and designs of undersea life. And you can see on the left these beautiful, they're plankton, right? Basically radiolaires. And on the right, you can see Binet, who was an architect and a designer, and he clearly was inspired by this beautiful microorganisms to create these, they're actually clasps, they're studies for clasps. Binet was also the architect who created the huge gate of the 1900 exhibition, and it looks like a huge microorganism with bulbous colors everywhere. It's really, you can see that science, people were interested, even if they weren't scientists, they were inspired by the structures and by nature. And our final slide, and we're going to see these pieces, this idea of, let's go back to geometry we already mentioned from nature. The round shapes on the left, you have beautiful transparent Picajot enamel with that radiating theme from the 1870s. But look, in this very modern brooch by Cartier in 1906, there's many years separating those two, but we're going back to this beautiful overlapping shapes and simplification of forms.
And these are directly from Islamic architecture, correct?
Exactly. This actually, yes, Cartier was in their archives. It talks about Gothic symbols, and for us as Art Nouveau people, we see those rather as leaves or parsley or as algae.
And the one on the left are definitely perhaps Islamic also.
That's definitely an Islamic influence, and we'll see that radiating sort of rosace structure. And if you look carefully on, we'll try to show you later on the transparent enamel. There's little motifs that are designed by Riffaut, who was one of the reinventors of plique-à-jour.
So we're going to go and look in the exhibition. On our way, I'd like to thank our Asian teams and thank them so much for all the work they've organized for the simultaneous translation and for the moderation. And thank you so much to Celine also for taking care of your questions and your comments, which we'll answer at the end. Paul, we'd love for you to show us a little bit about this exhibition that you and Rosella have organized over years of hard work. Let's start perhaps with this fascinating juxtaposition of this interesting picture. I want my breakfast milk in that picture, and that bracelet.
Well, you're in the first theme of the exhibition, which is a strange bestiary. You can see it looks like a Gothic cathedral. We'd like to thank our concepts team that designed these exhibitions for us. It's so beautifully, this dark sort of velour atmosphere. And yes, this first case is very interesting because we have a piece by René Lalique, the great René Lalique, who we've been going on about already. He was a great master jeweler, but also glass. And you can see 1905, he's already had a very successful career as a jeweler, and he's becoming more and more enthralled with glass. And you can see it's molded glass. It's a faun who's probably going to embrace that nymph.
Well, it also makes me think of
classical ideas.
Poussin, the 18th century or 17th century even, right?
Yes, and we also, yes, very much. And we also found a parallel with a sculpture, an ivory sculpture by Jean Bologna with the same position. So this shows us that Lalique was extremely cultured man. He went to museums, and look at the working of that gold. It looks like a veritable forest, and that iridescent, beautiful, translucent green enamel echoing that very classical scene. This is actually an echo in this beautiful little picture. It's actually in what's the word for Italian?
Pewter. It's
pewter,
in pewter.
Thank you.
And
pewter.
in America, we think of pewter for the Paul Revere and the Revolution, very simple, homely, functional pieces.
Yes.
And it is a picture.
Yes, it's a picture.
It's very elaborate.
Jules Desbois was a great sculptor, and his idea was l'art dans tout, art in everything. Part of the movement of Art Nouveau was to have this democratization, but look at those faunesses dancing in a spiral. They're very Rodinian. They're voluptuous
like
bodies.
Rodin.
Look
Yes.
like Rodin. Yes, and in fact, it's no accident because Desbois worked with Rodin in his studio. So all these people knew each other, and
They were friends,
we thought it was interesting to show a very simple object, everyday object, and this beautiful bracelet, which you can see Lalique, his obsession with classical ideas and also with glass.
Yes, and if we go here and we look at this Apparition, which to me, I don't know, I feel like it's just a lady swimming and someone scaring her while she's swimming, but it's not supposed to be that, is it, Paul?
Well, it actually has many meanings, and you can interpret it as you would like. Weber was one of the great jewelry maisons of the time. Henri Weber, his father and grandfather had been jewelers in Alsace-Lorraine. They come to Paris, they make the very brave choice to come to Paris right after the Franco-Prussian War and declare their French citizenship. And Weber actually asked Grasset, the great designer that we talked about, to design jewels for the 1900 exhibition. And this is the most symbolist of the interpretations of Grasset. It's called Apparitions. And as you said, Anizita, you have these waves in cloisonné enamel studded with topaz, which give it sort of bubbly feel. But look at that man in the back. He looks very angry. And this woman with her ivory face with her eyes closed. Is she afraid of him? Is he screaming at her, or is he afraid because a dead body floated up? It's I find it very Japanese, this idea of the ghosts and the beautiful.
And speaking of kind of haunting beauty under the sea, is that ivory, Paul? Tell us about that.
No, we talked about new materials
right here.
for the Art Nouveau artists. And galavit is actually, it's not ivory, it's an imitation ivory made with milk protein.
It means actually stone of milk.
Of milk, exactly. So you can see
so you can make ivory at home in your kitchen, except you have to use chloroform.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's not try this at home. But you can see by this idea of trying new materials. We're going to talk about horn at the end of the visit.
The idea is experimenting with new materials to make art. It's part of reclaiming and really grasping out what the French call the letters of nobility, the lettres de noblesse, for art as jewelry, jewelry as art. And even if we look here at this dragon, with one dragon biting down on it looks like seaweed that happens to be sprouting gorgeous natural freshwater American pearls, right?
Yes, they always grow. They grow that way because they grow in the actual hinge of the bivalve. This is the second sub-theme, which is troubled waters, clear waters. So as we told you earlier, all of these expeditions of the sea, people were enthralled with the sea. So whether it be this beautiful sea monster,
Georges Fouquet right?
Georges Fouquet sea monster with completely transparent enamel, plique à jour. His tail is moving. He looks like he's thrusting towards us, and very dramatic. And the piece on the poster as well
is right here.
The sea nymph. Fouquet Georges, the son of Alphonse, the great Alphonse Fouquet, who launches himself completely in Art Nouveau. You saw his shop with the peacocks.
I think you can see the mosaic of the opals even better live, right?
Yes, the mosaic of opals. It was one of his specialties. We'll talk more about opal in a minute. Opal was sort of the fetish stone of Art Nouveau jewelers. They loved the way that beautiful, the light plays and the play of colors, the opalescence, which comes from actually, opal is composed of silica, particles of silica and water. Now
is that a tuba? It's not a tuba from Japan, is it, Paul, or is it?
No, it's very influenced. One of the big influences in Art Nouveau was Japan, of course, the opening of Japan in the 1860s. And this is actually, Nock was a very interesting sculptor as well. He was a metal maker. He decides to devote himself for 10, 15 years just to precious objects. But you'll notice, again, the influence of Rodin. That body is very voluptuous, but her hair and her tail, they form the entire belt buckle. She's holding a ruby, which is actually quite unusual. Sometimes Nock was known to make pieces. He wanted to make pieces that were less expensive so that people could afford them. And what happens when everything is made by a great artist, it becomes a museum piece. So that's one of the big, let's say, inherent tensions in Art Nouveau. When it's made by hand, it becomes pricey.
But his goal was accessibility.
His goal was democratization of objects and of jewels.
So let's have a look. Should we have a look at these incredible thistles in diamond? The glittering giant, really, jewel made of thistles and diamonds.
Yes, now we're in the theme of we're in a garden. You can see it looks like a garden at the Crystal Palace in 1851. The idea of the obsession with nature that we talked about earlier, one of our themes of the exhibition, and again this very light atmosphere. And the idea of proliferating nature was very in the minds of people. You mentioned the insect earlier, Anazita, that Michelet wrote. He looked at insects as the perfect workers, the perfect artists, because they carried all of their tools with them.
That's quite an insect there, isn't it?
It's Boucheron who we're very fortunate to have these pieces.
Big.
By the way, I want to thank all of our lenders. We have 13 lenders, museums, private collections, the Museum of Decorative Arts, the Museum of René Lalique, etc. So I can't mention everybody, but the fact that this diamond jewelry is very popular in the 1870s, and Weber attributes it partly to the fact that there was the discovery of diamonds in South Africa, but also Le Ya was one of the great designers and workshop heads for Boucheron, and you can see that beautiful thistle leaf. It's this sort of using diamonds, but yet rendering the very spirit of the plant.
And thistle, again, as we say in our Art Nouveau course, which is going to be actually taking place here in the exhibition, during the exhibition, we say thistle is a symbol of Art Nouveau, isn't it? Because it's something that you would think of as a weed, it's something you would think of as threatening, but they take it and make something gorgeous out of it. And it also becomes a symbol of independence for Nancy.
Exactly. The Alsace-Lorraine, which was at that time still occupied by the Prussia, and so the thistle became a sort of a patriotic. So look at these diamond-encrusted, beautifully executed, very light. Weber talks about how the jewelers were starting to create much lighter settings. It's still gold and silver, but they're able to create this very realistic effect. And if we look here just for a minute at these beautiful, these little ceramic vases, Lucien Lévy-Durmel was one of the great self-taught symbolist artists, painters, pastelists, and he was also a ceramic artist. And he teams up with one of the stars of the time, Clément Massier, who's a third generation of great ceramic artists in the south of France. But what's interesting, these little pieces are extremely poetic. If you look, you have an insect, and he's placed very sporadically on this ground, this blue ground. We don't understand, is he in the sea, is it the sky? By the way, Lévy-Durmel was known for having recreated the Hispanic sort of this type of pottery that was lustrous. It was from the Renaissance. And you also have thistles, you have snails, and you also have some carnations. But it's very Japanese. We feel like we're looking at a page from Le Japon Artistique.
Exactly.
Bing's review that he created for 3 years.
So as we pass by many things we would love to share with you,
here's our flower that we showed you.
Yeah, there's the flower, there's my cicadas. Paul has selected something else he wants to reveal to you to give you a taste of this exhibition, which you have time to plan and come and see. It's open till September 30th. What about this opal piece on the left, Paul?
Well, the piece on the left is it's a beautiful little piece. We thought initially that it could have been a plaque de cou or a plaque for a choker, but it's so small, and it is a brooch. But it's inspired by the idea of we'll talk about in a minute, the choker. But what's beautiful is these wisteria that are so delicately sculpted by Lalique in opal. We talked about opal earlier. Very fragile stone. It's particles of hydrated silica, extremely fragile. And there's a lot of mythology around opals in the 19th century, especially Sir Walter Scott and one of his books. He talks about the opal as being...
Anne of Gerstein.
Anne of Gerstein, thank you. And Hermione, the evil woman who wears an opal in her hair, and they throw water on her and she dissolves.
But stay tuned for our book on cliches.
Yes.
It's going to blast some cliches in jewelry coming out in October. We talk about how that happened, about opal. Interesting, before we pass on to the next case, I'd love to maybe ask you to talk to us a little bit about those chrysanthemums. Those are in glass, and we can see how René Lalique transitioned really to being interested in glass, because here he's creating the opalescent effect with glass in those chrysanthemums. And of course, studying it off with my favorite, the natural Baroque pearl. But it's interesting how I like that you put these side by side, the glass opalescent and the real opalescent. And you almost could make a mistake looking at it. You could play with people as to which one is which.
In a photograph, it's more difficult to see the difference. But it's true that René Lalique showed his genius. When he moved to Rue Thérèse after buying Jules Détap's workshop on Place Gaillon, he moves to Rue Thérèse, and this is where, in the late 19th century, and this is where he starts experimenting with glass, with enamel. He rediscovers he himself plique à jour enamel, and it shows you his mastery of glass. It really does look like opals, and that beautiful naturalistic
Speaking of mastery of glass, there's that one you showed in the lecture. Oh gosh, I can't stand it. You have to come and see it. And that masterpiece where you just see a winter landscape, it's exactly out of a Japanese ukiyo-e work of art.
Exactly.
Just the winter landscape, and the whole snowy environment deep in winter in the forest is glass with enamel and gold. Just a peek we have some more to look at because Paul has chosen this fabulous piece. There's a lot to say about this fabulous piece right here, right, Paul?
Well, here we are at the heart of the exhibition, Metamorphosis. The idea that we talked about earlier, metamorphosis in two forms. In the form of bodies changing into other types of living beings, because they were starting to think about life and why can't a human body sprout wings? Why can't a human body grow feathers? And the other idea of metamorphosis for the exhibition is also of the materials themselves.
Oh, and for me, that's also women saying, we want to vote, we want rights, we want to
This woman is
evolve.
liberated. She's liberated herself. She's sprouted wings, and she's flying away. And you can see Lalique's techniques for sculpture, for metal engraving. And look at the enamel work on the tail. She's got that it's sort of a foreboding forked tail. So, and her wings, look at the structure. They're completely plique-à-joie enamel
but
with
it also,
little flecks of gold. And there's a double design with diamonds and gold. So she's almost like, is she going to fly to the heavens or is she going to return to the sea with those beautiful diaphanous wings? It's really a masterpiece.
But she's also Loie Fuller doing her dance at the 1900 exhibition,
very
right?
True.
It could be Loie Fuller. This is exactly what Loie Fuller did, which was she imitated the growth of flowers and the movement of butterflies in her dance.
Exactly.
No? Don't you agree?
Transformation, women becoming flowers, becoming butterflies, exactly.
And this, which is a paper cutter, to me is a perfect example. This woman is waking up, being born out of this organic structure, like a flower that's blossoming. She's saying, I want my rights, I want to have business, I want to make a business, I want to be Sarah Bernhardt with her theater, I want all those rights that women will get, but it's going to take them a while.
She is metamorphosing.
Right? And what should we look at next, Paul? What have you picked out for us?
I think if we go, we could probably go to the, should we go to Follow?
Yes, maybe to the dangerous flower, the Daturus. I don't know if any of you are Agatha Christie fans, but in her book, The Caribbean Mystery, she talks about this Daturus flower, and she says that it's known that Indian wives would drug their, English wives in India would drug their husbands with Daturus flower.
Goodness.
I don't even know what to think, but apparently Daturus flower is used as a murder weapon in a couple of her books and in other police. And but why exactly was that chosen by Follot to put in a comb in a lady's hair?
Well, first I wanted to tell you that we're in the third theme of our exhibition, which is crystallization. People were totally enthralled at the 1900 World Exhibition. People could go underground and see crystals growing. They could go to this kaleidoscopic room called the Palace of Optics with kaleidoscopes projecting onto mirrors. They could look at the moon. So our designers here on the Concepts VCA team, they really captured this idea of the people's imaginations by mirrors, by kaleidoscopes. And also, you said, you're right, we're in stylization. We've gone through the arabesque that you saw earlier, and Paul Follot, who became, as you said, a very elegant designer of jewelry. He was actually working for the Maison Moderne. I didn't mention earlier that the art market was totally exploding in the 1880s, and you had, of course, a Bing who created Art Nouveau, his gallery, and Julius Mayer-Greff, who created La Vie Moderne. And so Follot was working for Mayer-Greff, and he created beautiful jewels with horn, as you said, that datura flower, which is extremely evocative. The perfume of the datura flower, as you said, is thought to be poisonous. And again, the comb, very Japanese influence in Art Nouveau. And on the right, these beautiful hazelnut leaves with the little soft centers with pearls. You've probably noticed that the stones and the gems are a secondary role. This is one of the themes of Art Nouveau. The actual working of the horn, which exists for probably 1,000 years in the Orient, is something quite new in the aesthetic.
What about this flower right here?
Let's focus on this very eccentric man, Enguerrand du Sureau de la Croix. He was actually a French noble, so he had no money problems, if I could just put it bluntly. He could spend his whole life working on his art. So he was obsessed with creating a new type of enamel, Remember the enamel craze we talked about with trying to recreate plique à jour? So he creates, with his daughter-in-law who was by his side, he created his own kiln, and he starts experimenting, and he creates this very voluptuous enamel. It's called a high relief double cabochon enamel. And he perfects it, and as you can see, it gives it a thick, a very voluptuous form. He actually also is going to have a brevet, a patent, excuse me, in 1889. And this hat pin shows us this beautiful, he uses a filigree of gold and fills it with his enameling technique. We have 2 other pieces by him in the exhibition, so we hope you'll come see. I know a lot of you are far away, but if you may come, we have, the Musée d'Orsay has a huge collection of his pieces and his drawings. A very less known, but very interesting artist.
Well, this exhibition gives a chance to get to know some that we may or may not know. I think this is your favorite piece. Is that your favorite?
One of my favorites is this Lalique. When I went to Pforzheim, the Schmuck Museum, which you all must go to, and we're very grateful to have this, and all of the lenders, by the way. This piece is actually willow wands, but it's with glass. Those branches are in glass.
They're not mother of pearl, even though
No.
you think it is when you look at it.
It's glass. And also the Moonstone, the second fetish stone of the Art Nouveau jewelers and René Lalique. The Moonstone, they loved it because, as you can see, there's that refraction, or I'm not using the right scientific, the reflection, or the light is filtered through micro inclusions, and it creates that beautiful star-like effect. It's actually, Moonstone is rare to have that effect, that adularescence it's called. So again, the moon, the night, it represents a lot of different poetic things for Lalique. And in the middle, we talked a little earlier about these neck ornaments. They're actually, women were wearing chokers, and they took that idea from the Belle Epoque ladies who were wearing pearls and diamonds, and they use it as an excuse to create very
Right in the center
figurative,
of the neck. Yeah.
yes, figurative pieces. And I wanted to highlight the artists, the 2 pieces on the left and the right, because they're a very less known jeweler named Saint-Yves, Émile Saint-Yves. And we can't find much about him. In fact, we're trying to find his dates. Weber mentions him, but in a long list of jewelers. Weber, of course, wrote the history of French jewelry of the 19th century. I keep saying Weber without explaining why. We always look at his book.
Well, in the class, we show the great big book that he wrote, which without him, we might not have even this discussion.
No, we wouldn't. So these sort of neck plaques, and in fact, I think the one on the left might even be a belt buckle, but you can see this is in silver gilt, and he has these flowers billowing from left to right, and delicate stones. He uses cabochon opals on the right and emeralds on the left to give us this rendition. This is in the actual stylized section because we can't really see what plants those are, but it doesn't matter. And of course, René Lalique with another version of Datura flowers in the middle with champ levé enamel. By the way, our next, in July, we're going to do in person a lecture just on enamel with Marie Oberlin. And
who teaches the enamel class at the school.
We're also going to do a version online in September. So
yes.
This actual exhibition has every technique: painted enamel, champ levé enamel, plique à jour enamel, ronde de bosse you saw on that snow,
yes.
that scene that Lalique, that we showed, the snow on the branches. So it's going to be a great source of information for the enamel lecture that we're going to do.
And a source for teaching the class.
Exactly.
So hopefully you can come and be in live to take the class in person. Now, photography, our subject of our next upcoming lecture, was important to this real genius. He had a science degree. I was reading about him this morning, and he had a science degree.
Monarch Harrison.
Monarch Harrison. He had the Academy of Sciences.
He was actually a theoretician, but he loved also to work with metal. He thought that he loved geometry as well. He read the works of Eugène Grasset, who wrote a book on drawing geometry. This is the period when students are encouraged to draw geometrical shapes, interspersing. And he actually, Monarch Harrison is a very interesting person because he worked metal by hand. He actually, he worked it by, there's the process where it's even, it makes the metal even more strong. You work it by bending it back and forth, just below the melting point. It's called hard worked. So he believed that everything should be done by hand, and he liked the fact that they're tool marks. And he actually was inspired by the geometry of nature. You'll never guess what that actually is representing. It's actually representing the cross section of a sea cucumber. A sea cucumber that animal that's sort of rise at the bottom of the sea.
It's a delicacy in Chinese cuisine.
Very popular in China, yes. And apparently, if you look at the center of a sea cucumber, you get this beautiful geometry. And so again, we're the last section of our exhibition is crystallization. We're going back to the structures, whether it's organic or crystal. All of the artists and young people and students, they were learning about the natural world, and it was inspiring them to go back to more order. It's almost like in the 18th century, at the end of the Hokai period, you had a certain engraver named Couchin who said, please come back to the straight line. It was very similar. As early as 1905, 1907, people were already criticizing Guimard, the great designer of the metro entrances. They said Guimard is like a sprinter who's overshot his goal. He didn't invent a style, he invented an idea. So, and please, let's go back to the straight line. I don't believe this, but this is what, it's very similar as I'm an 18th century originally specialist. So I find in France, you always go back to order. And there's a, do we have time to look at Mito or not? Here, we wanted to highlight. We have three female artists in this.
Yes, because
exhibition.
a question has come up already.
Yes.
How many female enamelers were there?
We have Elisabeth Bonté with the beautiful bats, and we also have Jeanne Soyer, a great enameler, and hopefully you can come see her. But this is Mito. She was a very interesting lady. Her name, that was her nickname, Mito. She was the wife of a very famous art critic, René Jean, one of the creators of the Museum of Decorative Art. It's very important. But let's talk about her. Her real name was Pierrette Madeleine Janine Berthaud. And what's interesting is she died very young, and she was 31. But we have a record of, in the different salons in Paris when they have exhibitions, she was mentioned several times for her jewelry creations. And she was an expert enameler. She learned enameling from Grandhomme, who was a great enameler. And look at, she does these, the capucine, what do we say in English for capucine? This big flat leaves. And she does it, it's very stylized. And you can see she's actually showing you the seeds. So we've gone from our whiplash curve, from all of this crazy proliferating nature, to a very, it's almost arts and crafts, isn't it, this piece?
Yes.
Mito, this piece here reminds me of if you're looking at William Morris or Ruskin, this return to nature. And Boutet de Monvel, the great painter, decorator, designer, he's known for his portraits of the Maharaja of Indore.
That's the piece on the extreme left.
The left, sorry.
With the pearl on it.
Look what he does. Yeah. He renders with its mother of pearl or a pearl with enamel, and it's sort of this spiral within this spiraling algae. So again, nature has its order, and the artists were inspired by a return to the order.
And speaking of order, Islamic architecture, Islamic motifs are clearly in evidence in those two combs you talked about, the two pins for the hair. This piece, which is weirdly geometric and makes me think of something that I would see in the Middle Eastern architecture, and it's actually by Lalique, and not at all what you would think. It's a return to order again. Yeah. And there you have, is it seaweed? Is it a Moroccan design motif? Is it Gothic? You have this mirror image, it's sapphire actually, and diamond Cartier piece from 1906,
yes,
right?
It was really a time, Louis Cartier told his students, his designers, of course they created the style guirlande, which was influenced by Louis XVI style, but they started playing with geometry. If you look into those drawings that we were so lucky to see at that exhibition last year, so the designers were starting to work with geometry, with interlocking shapes, and of course the great Jacquot wouldn't arrive for a few more years, but Charles Jacquot, who would take that to a new level and create a sort of modern pre-Art Deco style. But we loved this piece because it has these interlocking circles, and platinum allows to have that open space, negative space, and those leaves in the middle, which in the archives of Cartier are written as a Gothic motif. But we sort of also see, I think you as well, sort of, it could be seaweed, it could be parsley, and the contrasting color of the diamonds and the sapphires, really, actually small scale works are very perfect for sort of experimentation. And again, like you said, those hairpins by Riffaut. Riffaut was one of the enamelers who first rediscovered plique à jour enamel. And he worked with Boucheron, and he exhibited many pieces with this style, with this transparent enamel. and in the 1867 International Exhibition. And he eventually gives, or Boucheron acquires the actual patent. But like Weber makes a joke, how can you patent something that's taken off like wildfire? So if you look carefully, it does look like Islamic art, and it's a beautifully executed piece. And that Lalique piece on the left is, we've come full circle. We had Lalique the flower, we had Lalique the butterfly woman, we had Lalique the dragonfly lady, and now we have Lalique
the geometrist.
Geometry. And this is the period when Lalique will go back just to glass.
So it's now going to be a time for us to take some of your questions. We only have 6 more minutes, just about. But Paul,
sorry,
here are a
too
couple.
much.
No. We're sharing the chance to bring you into this exhibition, which is precious. We don't know if you'll be able to get here before September 30th, so you're here with us now. We have lots of marvelous questions. For example, I think you might like this one. Some Art Nouveau works look beautiful to everyone, while others look very grotesque. What was the grotesque work trying to express?
I think it was actually trying to express, it was symbolism, the scary,
dreams, nightmares.
The dreams, nightmares. And actually, if you remember that Alphonse Fouquet, that beautiful mock-up with the chimera and the snake, it's not so far away from the works that you saw after, with the lady turning into a butterfly, the people drowning. It's symbolism.
And I think symbolism
and linked to historicism.
And symbolism is reacting to the industrialization of the world, the reduction of the human to a cog in a wheel. It's looking back to pre-industrial revolution, to our dreams, to our legends, to our fairy tales even. And that's why symbolism and the birth of psychology are very linked.
Yes, thank you very much. And also you just made me realize another point which we should stress is that the idea that Art Nouveau was jewelry was counterculture. It wasn't the main line, diamond, white jewelry, diamonds and pearls, the corsage, the beautiful corset. It was a counterculture. So ladies of the stage wore it. Some great patrons of the arts wore it, Madame de Béag. So it's a very interesting question, and I think a lot of it was meant to shock.
It was.
We're not just going to wear a nice little, I love pearls and diamonds, don't get me wrong, but we're not just going to wear beautiful 18th century inspired jewels.
That's why the hippies and Art Nouveau are connected directly. The hippies, the 1960s, they wallpapered their rooms with Musha portraits. The first hippies who made money, like the Beatles, like Barbra Streisand, they bought Art Nouveau pieces and they collected them. So there's a direct link. It's the hippies and the preppies, really. The Belle Epoque ladies were the preppies and the hippies were the Art Nouveau ladies. And they could be sisters in the same family, fighting over it with their parents. It's exactly that. Very, very good point.
Do we have time for questions?
There's a good question here.
I'd love to answer more if we
can. Can I ask what metals are used for most of the pieces? I am more interested in those that are enameled. I'm assuming that those are 18 to 24 karat gold and or fine silver.
Exactly. All
Not
of the
always,
above.
though.
Not always. They could also use copper, or they could use, as we saw, pewter.
Brass.
But most of the pieces that we've shown here, with the exception of the pewter, were probably gold. Yes. But that's a good question. The actual carats, I don't know.
And is imitation ivory used in contemporary jewelry? Tagua nut, which we use at the school, is a natural material that can look just like ivory, right?
I think so.
Yes. Why has the Art Nouveau concept of finding beauty in works rather than materials not taken root in the market? Well, I think it has.
Oh, yes, it has.
Mystery setting is that.
Yes. There's many, and there's also many designers today who are more interested in the actual composition than the technique or the expensive stones.
And they use recycled metal. They make jewelry out of bottle caps, right?
Yes, of course. We can also, was the question more about Art Nouveau aesthetic or techniques?
I think it's saying that they were reviving loving the material, like the métier, the work, the use of the crafts, the idea of
well, you have a whole generation of what we call bench jewelers.
Right.
It's not only the Place Vendôme and the beautiful maison here, but there's also a lot of art jewelers who do things by hand, of course.
Yes.
We can think of our friend Thierry.
Oh, absolutely.
Thierry Vendôme, he has his one workbench on the street in the Marais, and he makes everything by hand, and he really is, the craftsmanship is very hands-on. You can even watch him.
Yes, the love of the craftsmanship is one of the ways we say that Art Nouveau is still very much alive today, because it brought back that love of craftsmanship, don't you think?
Oh, I definitely think so. I don't think craftsmanship is lost, especially especially in where we are. There's some very talented people working in this building who are devoting their lives to craftsmanship.
I agree, and I was just thinking we could move over here to be in front of this gorgeous enamel piece as we finish, because this enamel piece is a perfect example, and it's on copper. So it's an example of how the materials, you working with materials, can make something very precious. Just to, in a way, help answer that question.
This is our third lady artist, Jeanne Soyer. She was the third generation of enamelers. Her grandfather had been involved with the great renaissance of painted enamel. Painted enamel is actually attributed with Limousin, the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century, and becomes extremely popular in Renaissance in France. And again, revival of this. It's not new, but it's a rediscovery of the techniques. And this Lévy d'Urmeur, this lady with a gust of wind, and she almost looks like she's spewing out the leaves, if I may be blunt.
Or she's the goddess of autumn, bringing the autumn winds.
Lévy d'Urmeur, the great painter who did those beautiful little vases that we saw, and Jeanne Soyer, who we'd like to pay homage to.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. As you can see, Paul has a lot to share with you. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to welcome you here in person. If not, you can rewatch this on YouTube and see us again. Join us next time for the photography and jewelry. Join us via our Hong Kong campus. You have in front of you the QR codes for the Hong Kong campus and also the Paris campus. Stay in touch on Instagram and Facebook, through our YouTube videos, through sending messages if you have more questions for us. We had loads of beautiful questions. We're sorry the WeChat's going to cut us, so we don't have time this afternoon.
But they can send to the contact, right? You'll all get a contact address in your email. Please send the questions and we'll answer them as carefully as we can.
Please do, and tomorrow you'll get the bibliography by email also to go further. We thank you very much. Thank you, Paul and Rosella, for all your great work. And
thank you to the interpreters and everyone behind the screens that we don't see.
To our teams in Hong Kong, in Japan, in Shanghai. Yes, thank you so much, Celine.
Alice, I know Alice is probably there somewhere.
Yes, so good afternoon and good night, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.